The dining room smelled like my mother's perfume, and underneath it, something sharper. Fear, maybe. I didn't know fear had a smell until that night. Papers covered the good china table, the one that only came out for holidays and funerals. This was neither, and somehow that made it worse. My mother's hands were folded so tight her knuckles had gone white. My father stared at a spot on the tablecloth like it owed him an answer. And Melissa, my sister, the one this whole family had spent years rearranging itself around, wouldn't lift her eyes off the floor, like she was hoping it might open up and take her somewhere else. Nobody in that room was breathing right. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I reached for one folder. Just one. My hand was steadier than the rest of me, and I said 4 words back to my mother, the same 4 words she'd said to me 6 weeks earlier, like they'd cost her nothing at all. Melissa needs this family. I watched her face when they landed, watched something behind her eyes go out, like a switch thrown in a house that didn't have any power left to lose. You only need 1 day. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. My uncle, who'd spent the last 20 minutes defending my parents like it was his job, went completely, permanently silent. Nobody said a word. I'll leave you there for now. Because to understand how 4 words could do that to a room, you need to know everything that happened in the 6 weeks before it. What they almost took from me. And what it cost me to take it back. If you're new here, welcome. I tell real stories about family, loyalty, and the moments people finally stop bending for everyone else. If that's the kind of story you're here for, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Now let me take you back. 6 weeks earlier, before any of this happened. Back when I still thought this was going to be the best season of my life. 6 weeks earlier, my life looked nothing like that dining room. I run a wedding photography business in Savannah. 15 years of building it from nothing, from shooting friends' backyard ceremonies for gas money to being the photographer brides wait 8 months to book. I've documented over 400 weddings. I know exactly how to catch the moment a father sees his daughter in her dress for the first time, the split second before anyone even realizes they're about to cry. I just never had that moment for myself. Until this year. Until Daniel. We got engaged in the spring, and for the first time in my adult life, I let myself want something purely for me. A real wedding. My wedding. Not squeezed between client shoots, not planned around everyone else's emergencies. Mine. I remember standing in my studio holding swatches of ivory and champagne, actually laughing out loud because it felt so strange to be the bride instead of the woman behind the camera. My best friend Rachel used to joke that I was the family's emergency contact for everything. Melissa's car breaks down, call Tessa. Mom needs help hosting Thanksgiving, call Tessa. Dad's computer crashes the week of his retirement party, somehow, still, call Tessa. I always came through. It just felt like who I was, and I told myself this season would be different. My season. I had the venue booked, the dress altered, vendors confirmed down to the last centerpiece. Every night I'd sit with my laptop, checking things off a list I'd been building since I was 22 years old, and something in my chest would loosen a little more each time. For once, I wasn't the one solving everyone else's problem. For once, somebody was going to show up for me. My phone buzzed on a Tuesday evening while I was steaming my veil in the guest room. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was tired, and the last 3 calls that week had all started with some version of your sister needs help, but something made me pick up. Tessa, honey, she said, and there was a tightness in her voice I recognized immediately. I need to talk to you about something important. I set the veil down slowly. I'd heard that tone before. But this time, something about it felt different, heavier, like she'd already decided how this conversation was going to end before it even began. It's Melissa, Mom said. She's overwhelmed with the kids and she needs help. We think you should look at your schedule. Not could you, not would you mind. We think you should. I sat down on the edge of the bed, veil still draped over my lap. What's going on with her? The daycare fell through again. And you know how she gets when things pile up. She can't manage 3 kids and a job and everything else by herself. She needs somebody she trusts. I already knew where this was headed. I'd walked this road so many times I could recite the directions in my sleep. Mom, I love those kids. You know I do. But I have 3 weddings in the next 2 weeks. And we're not asking you to cancel your work, honey. A pause. Just to help where you can. just to help where you can. That phrase again. The one that had covered everything from watching the kids for an afternoon to rearranging an entire month of my life. Where I can had never once meant what I thought it meant. Dad got on the line then, his voice steady in that way that made arguing feel pointless before it even started. Your sister's struggling, Tessa. That's what family does. We show up for each other. We, like it was a shared decision, like it wasn't always, somehow, just me. I thought about Melissa, 29 years old, 3 kids. A job she complained about but never left. A husband who worked nights and somehow was never available when things got hard. I thought about how many times Melissa's struggling had rearranged my calendar over the years. Recitals I'd missed my own plans for. A vacation I'd cut short. A photography conference I'd skipped entirely. The one that could have meant real growth for my business. I have a wedding coming up too, Mom. Mine. We know, sweetheart, nobody's forgetting that. But the way she said it, light, quick, already moving past it, told me exactly how much room my wedding actually occupied in this conversation. So we'll figure out the details, Dad said, already sounding like the matter was settled. You'll help with the kids when Melissa needs it. That's just how this works. That's just how this works. I sat there holding the phone, feeling something shift underneath me that I couldn't quite name yet, because this didn't sound like a request anymore. It sounded like an assignment. The call came 3 days later, and this time it wasn't about helping where I can. I was at a final dress fitting when my phone lit up with Mom's name for the second time that afternoon. I stepped into the hallway of the boutique, still pinned into ivory silk, and answered, Tessa, we need to talk about your wedding weekend. Not the kids. Not Melissa's schedule. My wedding weekend. What about it? Melissa's childcare situation has gotten worse. The sitter backed out completely, and with her work schedule that week, she's going to need someone with the kids Friday through Sunday. Mom's voice was calm, rehearsed almost, like she'd practiced this in the mirror. That's your wedding weekend, I know. But we think this is more important. I actually laughed, a short disbelieving sound, because surely I'd misheard her. Mom, that's my wedding. I'm getting married that weekend. We know, honey. But Melissa can't do this alone, and you're the only one she trusts with the kids. Dad's voice came on next, steady as ever. Weddings can be small. Weddings can be rescheduled. A single mother without childcare, that's a real emergency. I'm not a single mother, Dad, I'm your daughter, and I'm not rescheduling my wedding. Silence. Then Mom again, softer now, using the voice she reserved for talking me into things. Sweetheart, think about it practically. You'll have other chances to celebrate. Melissa doesn't have other options right now. Something in my chest went cold and very still. So I'm supposed to miss my own wedding. We're not saying miss it entirely. That's exactly what you're saying. Mom's voice went quiet, but there was nothing gentle in it. Melissa needs this family, Tessa. You only need 1 day. I sat there holding the phone, that sentence settling into me like a stone dropped into still water. Dad's tone shifted, harder now, the patience running thin. Tessa, we didn't raise you to be this selfish. Family comes first. It always has. Selfish. The word landed like a slap. 15 years of showing up. Every emergency, every favor, every rearranged plan. And the one time I asked for something for myself, I was selfish. I need you both to hear me, I said, my voice shaking now. I am not missing my wedding. Then I hope you can live with what that means for this family, Dad said. The line went quiet after that, no goodbye, no softening. I stood in that hallway in my wedding dress, pins digging into my sides, staring at a phone that had just gone dark in my hand. And for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. They weren't asking anymore. They were waiting to see if I'd finally break. Mom called back that same night. I almost didn't answer. I don't understand why you're doing this to us, she said, before I'd even said hello. Her voice cracked in the practiced way it always did when she wanted me to feel the crack. Doing this to you? Mom, I'm not doing anything except getting married on the day I plan to get married. You know how hard things are for Melissa right now. You have a husband, a business, a good life. She has nothing close to that stability. That's not because of me. No one said it was because of you. A pause, sharp enough to cut. But you've always been the one who could handle things. That's just who you are, Tessa. Who you are. Like it was written somewhere, some contract I'd signed as a kid and forgotten about. Dad took the phone next. I could hear the disappointment in the way he cleared his throat before he even spoke. Your mother's up half the night worrying over this. You understand that, don't you? I understand you're asking me to skip my own wedding. We're asking you to think about somebody besides yourself for once. For once. 15 years of birthdays missed, vacations cut short, a photography conference I'd never gotten back the chance to attend, and it landed on me like I'd never given an inch in my life. I've thought about everybody but myself for years, Dad. That's not fair, and you know it. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. What's not fair is that the one time I ask for something, it becomes a family crisis. He didn't have an answer for that. Just a long breath and then, quieter, we'll talk when you've calmed down. Calmed down. Like I was the one being unreasonable. I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, Daniel's hand on my back, saying nothing because there was nothing to say yet. 2 days later, my cousin Lauren sent me a text out of nowhere, heard about the wedding stuff. Hope you and your parents work it out. Family's family. I stared at that message for a long time. I hadn't told Lauren anything, which meant somebody else had already started telling the story. And judging by her tone, it wasn't the version where I was the one who'd been asked to disappear from my own life. By the end of that week, it wasn't just Lauren. My Aunt Denise called on Thursday, her voice syrup-sweet in that way I'd learned meant she was about to deliver a message she hadn't come up with herself. Sweetheart, I heard there's some tension about the wedding date. Your mother's worried sick. Did she tell you why there's tension, Aunt Denise? Something about Melissa needing help with the kids? A pause. I'm sure you two will figure it out. You always do. You always do. Like my whole life was one long demonstration of figuring things out for other people. Uncle Victor texted the next day, shorter and blunter, the way he always was. Heard you're causing your folks some grief over the wedding thing. Family helps family, kiddo. Don't let a party come between you and your parents. A party. 15 years of dress fittings and venue deposits and dreaming about this one day, reduced to a party by a man who hadn't even asked me a single question about what actually happened. I called Melissa myself, because I needed to hear it directly from her. If she told me she genuinely had no options, no backup, nobody else in the world, maybe I could find a way through this? Tessa, I don't know what you want me to say, she said, sounding more annoyed than desperate. I asked Mom and Dad for help. That's it. I didn't tell them to ruin your wedding, but you knew what weekend it was. Silence. Then quieter. I figured you'd work it out, you always do. There it was again, that phrase, like a family motto nobody had ever bothered to write down because everybody already knew it by heart. I hung up feeling something I hadn't expected. Not just hurt anymore, but tired. Bone tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. That night I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine going warm in my hand, and my mind drifted somewhere I hadn't let it go in years. 3 years ago. The second location. I'd found the perfect studio space downtown, ready to sign the lease, ready to finally expand the business I'd spent a decade building. And then Melissa's wedding planning fell apart 2 months out, and Mom asked if I could just hold off a little while and help fix it. I let the lease go. I never signed anywhere else. I sat there on that porch, wine glass sweating in my hand, and realized I couldn't actually remember the last time I'd chosen myself over somebody else's emergency. Not once. Not ever. And that realization sat heavier in my chest than anything my parents had said all week. I couldn't sleep that night. So I did the thing I always do when my mind won't settle. I got up, made tea, and went looking for something to organize. I ended up in the spare room, in front of the old filing cabinet where I keep years of business records. Client contracts, tax documents, invoices going back over a decade. I told myself I was just going to check on something for an upcoming shoot, but my hands kept pulling folders that had nothing to do with any client. There was the studio lease I never signed. I found the email chain still sitting in an old folder, the landlord following up twice, then a final message saying the space had gone to someone else. I remembered exactly how that felt at the time. I told myself it hadn't mattered, told myself there'd be other studios. There weren't. Underneath that was a folder of wedding bookings, my actual business, the one that paid my bills. And I found 3 cancellations over the years, each one because I'd blocked out dates for family things that later got called emergencies. A destination wedding I'd turned down the same month Melissa needed help moving. A referral from a bridal magazine I'd never followed up on because that was the week of Melissa's second pregnancy scare. I kept going. A birthday dinner for my 30th that got moved because Melissa's babysitter canceled. A weekend trip with Daniel, back when we were only dating, that I'd cut short by 2 days because Mom said Melissa was really struggling. None of it looked like much on its own. A missed dinner, a canceled trip, a studio that never happened. But laid out together on my kitchen table at 1 a.m, it didn't look like coincidence anymore. It looked like a pattern. A long one. One I'd never let myself see all at once, because looking at it all at once meant admitting something I didn't want to admit. I sat back in my chair, tea gone cold, and asked myself a question I'd never actually let myself ask before. Had they ever once chosen me when choosing me meant not getting something they wanted from Melissa? I couldn't think of a single time. And once that question was in my head, I couldn't put it back where it came from. I looked down at the folders scattered across my table, and instead of putting them away, I reached for a blank notebook and started a new page. The strain didn't stay contained to my parents' phone calls. It started leaking into everything. Daniel found me crying in the closet 3 days later, sitting on the floor surrounded by garment bags, unable to explain why the sight of my own wedding dress had suddenly made my chest go tight. "Talk to me," he said, sitting down next to me, not touching me yet, just close. "I don't even know what I'm planning for anymore," I said. "Half of me is still hoping they'll come around. The other half is terrified they won't, and I don't know which one scares me more." He was quiet for a moment. "I need you to hear something, and I need you to really hear it. Whatever happens with your family, I'm not going anywhere. But I need to know you're not going to spend our wedding grieving people who are standing right in front of you, choosing not to show up." I didn't have an answer for that. I just leaned into his shoulder and let myself feel, for the first time all week, how frightened I actually was, not of missing the wedding, but of what it would mean about my whole life if I let them win. Work wasn't any easier. I lost focus during a client consultation that Thursday, quoted the wrong date for a shoot, and had to call back apologizing, feeling my professionalism, the one thing that had never wavered, start to crack at the edges. That night, still restless, I went back to the folders on my kitchen table. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just trying to feel like I had control over something. That's when I found the bank statement, not mine. A joint printout I'd kept years ago when I helped Melissa consolidate some bills, back when Mom asked me to just take a look at her finances during a rough patch. I remember doing it as a one-time favor. Except staring at the numbers now, I noticed something I'd glossed right past back then. A transfer. $1,500 sent from my business account to Melissa's, dated almost 4 years ago. I didn't remember sending it. I sat there for a long moment, feeling the tea in my stomach turn cold, and pulled out my laptop to check my own old account records. There it was again. Another transfer. Then another. Dates scattered across years, small enough that I'd never noticed them missing, but adding up to something I hadn't let myself count before. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened a blank spreadsheet. Because if there were 3 transfers I didn't remember agreeing to, I needed to know exactly how many more were sitting somewhere in my records, waiting to be found. By Saturday, my spreadsheet had 11 entries, 11 transfers over 4 years, ranging from $200 to that $1,500 one that started the whole search. Every single one sent from my business account to Melissa's, always around the same time each year, March, August, December. I sat there staring at the pattern until it clicked. Tax season, back to school, Christmas. The exact months Melissa always seemed to be struggling, I texted Mom, keeping my voice as neutral as I could manage over text. "Did you know I've been sending Melissa money for years?" I don't remember agreeing to most of it. Her response took almost an hour. "We didn't want to bother you with the details. You always said you wanted to help." I read that twice. I didn't remember saying that. Not about money I apparently didn't even remember sending. I called her because I needed to hear her voice, needed to know if what I was thinking was really true. "Mom, be honest with me. Did you ask me to send money? Or did you just tell Melissa I would and use my account to do it?" The silence lasted 3 full seconds too long. "Sometimes it was easier that way," she finally said. You were always so generous, Tessa. We knew you wouldn't mind once you understood the situation. Except I never understood the situation. I didn't know. We didn't want you worrying every time Melissa had a hard month. We were protecting you. Protecting me. From my own money. Moved out of my own account without my knowledge because they'd decided in advance what I would have said yes to. And what did you tell people when they asked how you split things between us? Another pause. What do you mean? I mean, Aunt Denise, Uncle Victor, everyone who thinks you treat Melissa and me exactly the same. Did you ever tell them about this? Tessa, that's not fair. We've always tried to be fair to both of you. But that word fair had started to feel like a costume they put on for family gatherings and photographs, something worn on the outside while something entirely different happened underneath. I hung up that call different than I'd hung up any of the others, not hurt, not even shaking, just clear. Because if they'd been quietly moving my money for 4 years while telling everyone they treated us equally, I needed to know what else had been happening behind my back that I'd never been told about. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it Everything. And I started pulling every record I could find. I spent the next several evenings doing something I'd never done before in my life. I stopped reacting, and I started documenting. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt almost clerical, sitting at my kitchen table each night with my laptop open, a mug of tea going cold beside me, working through years of my own life like I was building a case file instead of just remembering. I pulled old client calendars first, cross-referencing them against text messages I'd saved without ever meaning to keep them. Dates I'd blocked off for my own plans, then crossed out and rebooked because a family emergency had come up. I found the message chain from the studio lease. I found the wedding I'd turned down for a referral client, the same week Melissa needed help moving. I found a birthday I never got to celebrate properly, buried in a thread where Mom asked if I could just push it back a little. One by one, I dropped them into a folder on my laptop, then printed copies for a physical file. Because some part of me, the part that had spent 15 years documenting other people's most important days for a living, understood instinctively that photographs and memories fade, but paper and timestamps do not. Daniel found me at the table again on a Thursday night, this time with actual color in my face instead of tears. "You look different tonight," he said, sitting across from me. "I feel different." I turned my laptop toward him, showing him the spreadsheet, now organized into years, categories, dollar amounts. I always thought this was just how things were. Like I imagined half of it, or exaggerated it in my head because I was tired. He scanned it slowly, his jaw tightening as the pattern became visible to him too. "Tessa, this isn't in your head. This is documented. This is real." "I know," I said. "That's what scares me a little. Because now I can't unsee it." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "So what happens now?" I looked at the folder, thick with printed pages, years of my own quiet compliance staring back at me in black and white. Now I find out how deep this actually goes. Every transfer, every canceled plan, every promise they made me that they never kept. And then, I didn't have an answer for that yet, because facts were one thing. Proving a pattern to people who'd spent years explaining it away as coincidence, as generosity, as just who I was, that was going to take more than a spreadsheet. It was going to take every piece I could find and the right moment to put them all on the table at once. Despite everything I'd found, I still didn't want a war. I wanted my parents back, the ones I remembered from before all this, or maybe the ones I'd always wished they were. So I called Mom on Sunday afternoon and asked if she and Dad would meet me for coffee. Just the three of us. No Melissa, no audience, no extended family whispering in the background. "I'd like that," she said, and for a second her voice sounded almost like relief. "Maybe we can put all this behind us." I chose a quiet cafe outside of town, someplace neutral, someplace that didn't carry the weight of every holiday dinner we'd ever had at their kitchen table. I got there early and practiced what I wanted to say, over and over, until it stopped sounding rehearsed. They arrived together, Dad holding the door for Mom like he always did, and for a moment, watching them walk in, I let myself hope. "I don't want to fight anymore," I said, once we'd all sat down. "I just want you to understand how this has felt, not just the wedding, all of it." I told them, calmly, about the studio lease, about the money I never remembered agreeing to send, about feeling like my life had been quietly rearranged around Melissa's for years without anyone ever once asking if that was something I wanted. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. "Sweetheart, we had no idea you felt this deeply about it. We thought you understood." Something in me loosened, just slightly. Maybe this was it. Maybe they finally heard me. "So can we agree that things need to be different going forward? Starting with the wedding?" Dad shifted in his seat, and something in his expression changed before he even spoke. "Tessa, we hear that you're upset, but Melissa still needs someone that weekend. We were hoping, now that you've had time to think, you'd see reason." The floor seemed to drop out from under the conversation. That's what this whole conversation was about. Getting me to change my mind? "We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone," Mom said, her hand still resting on mine, suddenly feeling less like comfort and more like control. A solution that works for everyone except me. Neither of them answered that. I sat back in my chair, coffee going cold in front of me, and understood with total clarity that this had never been a conversation. It had been an ambush wearing a reconciliation's clothes, and I realized driving home in silence that there was no version of calm words that was ever going to reach them. After the coffee meeting, things didn't calm down. They escalated. Aunt Denise called me 2 days later, and this time there was an edge to her voice I hadn't heard before. "Your mother told me about the meeting. She said you brought up money, accused them of things, made quite a scene." "I didn't accuse anyone of anything, Aunt Denise." I showed them facts. "Well, it sounds like you're trying to punish them for trying to help Melissa." "That's not the Tessa I know." I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar exhaustion settle back into my shoulders. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm asking for the truth." "Sometimes the truth isn't as important as keeping a family together," she said, and hung up before I could answer. Melissa texted that same night, her message dripping with wounded innocence. "I can't believe you're dragging up old stuff to make Mom and Dad look bad. This is supposed to be about my kids, not your feelings." My feelings. Like 15 years of documented sacrifice was just an inconvenient mood I needed to get over. I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy left to explain. Again, something that should have never needed explaining in the first place. Dad called on Friday, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Your mother's been crying for 2 days because of what you said to her. I hope you're proud of yourself. I hope you understand why I said it. What I understand," he said, "is that you've decided to blow up this entire family over a wedding date. And when this is all over, and Melissa's still struggling and your mother's still hurt, I hope you can live with what you chose." The call ended, and I sat there in my studio between client appointments, staring at a wall of framed wedding photos, happy couples, beaming families, the exact kind of joy I built a career capturing for other people. I couldn't remember the last time my own family had looked at me that way. That evening, going through old email archives for the last of my financial documentation, I found something I hadn't been looking for. An email thread from years ago, between Mom and a family friend, forwarded to an old address I barely used anymore. The subject line read, Tessa's help with M's tuition. I opened it with hands that had gone strangely steady, bracing for whatever version of the truth was waiting for me inside. The email was from 4 years ago. Mom, writing to Aunt Denise, explaining a plan to help cover part of Melissa's tuition fees for a certification course. I read the first line and felt my stomach drop. "Don't mention this to Tessa directly. Just let her think it's coming out of the family savings. She'll feel better contributing if she thinks we're all pitching in equally." Equally. I kept reading. Aunt Denise had responded, agreeing it was probably easier that way, adding one line that landed harder than anything else in the entire thread. "She never asks questions when she thinks it's helping everyone. Just let her believe that. They knew. Not just that I was helping. They knew I didn't fully understand what I was helping with, and they decided, deliberately, not to correct that. Because clarity might have made me stop." I sat with that for a long time, the kitchen silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, feeling something inside me go quiet in a way that felt more permanent than anger. Because anger, I realized, still holds out hope. Anger still believes an apology might fix something. This wasn't anger anymore. I thought about the coffee meeting, the way Mom's hand had felt warm and steady over mine right before she asked me to reconsider my own wedding. I thought about every version of, we didn't want to worry you, and you always said you wanted to help, and understood finally that those weren't explanations. They were a strategy. One they'd used for years, refined without ever needing to discuss it out loud because I'd always played my part so well. Daniel found me still sitting there near midnight. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just pulled out the chair beside me and waited. They're never going to admit any of this, I said quietly. Not because they don't know. Because they do know, and they've decided it doesn't matter. So what does that mean for you? I looked at him, and for the first time in weeks my voice didn't shake. It means I stop waiting for them to choose differently. I make the choice instead. Silence held between us, patient, the kind that lets a thought finish forming. I turned back to my laptop, scrolling further down the old email thread. Past Aunt Denise's reply, past a few unrelated messages, until one line near the bottom caught my eye. A name I didn't expect. An attachment I'd never opened. I clicked on it, and everything I thought I already understood about my family rearranged itself one more time. The attachment was a scanned letter, written years ago in Dad's handwriting, addressed to nobody in particular. A draft, it looked like, maybe something he'd written and never sent. The subject line above it, added later by whoever forwarded the email, just said, "Found this going through the old house files, thought you'd want it in case anything ever comes up. In case anything ever comes up." The letter itself outlined, in Dad's own words, a plan from over a decade ago, an agreement that whatever Melissa couldn't manage on her own, Tessa would naturally take up the slack, because Tessa was built for responsibility, and Melissa needed room to grow without pressure. It wasn't a private complaint. It wasn't a moment of stress written and forgotten. It was a plan, written down. Years before any of this ever happened, I printed it and set it beside everything else on my kitchen table. The spreadsheet of transfers, the studio lease I never signed, the canceled bookings, the tuition email, years of texts where just this once turned out to be anything but. For the first time since this all started, I didn't feel like I was drowning in it. It felt like I was looking at evidence, because that's exactly what it was. Not my feelings, not my memory, which they could always find a way to question. Dates, numbers, their own words time-stamped and undeniable. I called Elaine Carter the next morning. She'd been close with our family for over 20 years, practically an aunt to me and Melissa both, and someone who'd been present for more holidays and family arguments than almost anyone outside our immediate circle. I hadn't told her anything yet. I just asked her, carefully, if she remembered a few specific moments over the years. She did, all of them, down to details I'd forgotten myself. "Tessa," she said quietly, near the end of the call. "I always wondered why nobody talked about how much you carried. I just never thought it was my place to say anything. It was the first time since this began that somebody outside my marriage had looked at the pattern and called it exactly what it was." I sat at my table that night with everything finally laid out in front of me. Documents, timelines, witnesses, their own words staring back at me in black and white, and understood that I had, without ever intending to, built something undeniable. The only question left wasn't whether the truth was real. It was how and when I was finally going to make sure nobody in that family could look away from it again. I knew, almost immediately, that a private conversation would never work. I'd tried that already. Private conversations gave them room to twist, deny, soften, and rewrite, the same way they'd rewritten everything else for years. This time, the truth needed witnesses. Mom's 60th birthday dinner was already scheduled for that Saturday, 3 weeks after the wedding I'd never agreed to give up. The whole family would be there. Mom, Dad, Melissa, Aunt Denise, Uncle Victor, and Elaine Carter, who'd already told me she wanted to be present, whatever I decided to do. It was the perfect setting. Not because I wanted to ruin her birthday, but because it was the one place I knew, without question, exactly who would be in the room. I spent the week preparing like I was building a client presentation, organized, methodical, nothing left to chance. I printed hard copies of everything: the spreadsheet of transfers, the studio lease emails, the tuition thread, Dad's old letter. I put them in a folder, tabbed and labeled, the way I'd learned to organize contracts for high-stakes weddings where one missing detail could unravel an entire day. Daniel offered to sit beside me. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, watching me arrange the folder one final time. "I know. That's exactly why I want you there." I called Elaine once more, the night before, just to confirm she still meant what she'd said. "I'll be there," she told me. "And Tessa, if they try to talk over you, I'll back you up. I saw enough over the years to know exactly what's true." I didn't call Aunt Denise or Uncle Victor to explain anything. Some part of me needed to see, unscripted, exactly how they'd react when the truth simply arrived in the room without warning. Saturday came faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, running through what I planned to say, keeping my voice steady even in rehearsal, because I knew the moment emotion took over, they'd use it against me. Daniel drove us to my parents' house that evening, the folder resting on my lap the entire ride, heavier than its actual weight. The driveway was already full of cars, balloons tied to the mailbox, laughter drifting from the backyard, warm and completely unaware of what was coming. Everyone inside that house was expecting an ordinary birthday party. I stepped out of the car, folder in hand, and walked toward the front door, knowing that by the end of the night, nothing about this family would be ordinary again. Dinner wound down around 8, plates cleared, the cake half eaten, everyone loose and laughing in that comfortable, unguarded way families get after a few glasses of wine. I waited until dessert was finished. Until everyone was seated, relaxed, present. Then I stood up. "Before we finish tonight," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need to say some things, and I need everyone here to hear them." The table went quiet. Mom's smile flickered, uncertain. Dad set his fork down slowly. "Tessa," Mom said, laughing a little, glancing around the table, "this is my birthday dinner." "I know. And I'm not trying to ruin it. I'm trying to finally be honest, in front of the people who love this family, about what's actually been happening in it." I opened the folder. I started calmly, the way I'd rehearsed, not with accusations but with dates. The studio lease I never signed. The wedding referral I turned down. The transfers from my business account, 11 of them over 4 years, that I never remembered approving. "That money was to help your sister," Dad said, his voice already hardening. "We never hid that from you." "Then, explain this," I said, sliding a printed page across the table. An email from 4 years ago. Mom telling Aunt Denise not to tell me directly what the money was for, because I'd feel better thinking it was coming from family savings, not just me. Mom's face went pale. That was one email, taken out of context. "There are 11 transfers, Mom. 11. All going in one direction." Aunt Denise shifted in her seat, not meeting anyone's eyes. "We were protecting you from unnecessary worry," Dad said. "That's not a crime, Tessa. Then explain this." I set down the second page, his own handwriting, a decade old. A plan, written before any of this started, describing exactly how I'd be expected to take up the slack for Melissa, permanently, because I was built for it. The table went completely silent. That was thinking out loud," Dad said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "That doesn't mean, it means you planned this," I said quietly. "Years ago, before the wedding, before the money, you decided who I was going to be in this family. And you never once asked if I agreed." Mom opened her mouth to answer, glanced at Dad, then closed it again. And in that silence, I understood something had already started shifting. Not because I'd raised my voice, but because for the first time their explanations had nowhere left to go. "This is ridiculous," Melissa said suddenly, pushing back from the table. "You're twisting everything to make yourself the victim. Nobody forced you to do any of this." "Didn't they?" I turned to her. "You called me every time something went wrong. You never once asked if I had the time or the money. You just assumed I would. Because you always said yes. Because saying no was never actually allowed in this family, Melissa. Not for me." Uncle Victor cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Now hold on. I've known Ronald and Cheryl 30 years. They're good people. This all sounds like it's gotten blown out of proportion." "Does it, Victor?" Elaine's voice cut through the room, calm but firm. Everyone turned toward her. Because I remember the wedding referral she turned down. I was there when she got that call. I remember her crying in my kitchen about it, saying she couldn't let her sister down. Victor's jaw tightened. I also remember, Elaine continued, asking Cheryl once, years ago, if it seemed fair that Tessa always gave things up and Melissa never did. Do you remember what you told me, Cheryl? Mom's face had gone rigid. She told me Tessa was stronger, that she could handle more, that it wasn't favoritism, it was just practical. Practical. That was the word she'd used. Not favoritism. Not unfair. Practical, like I was a tool that measured up better than my sister, not a daughter she was supposed to love the same way. Aunt Denise, who'd been silent since the letter came out, finally spoke, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know about the money. I swear I didn't know it went that far. You knew about the tuition email, I said quietly. You responded to it. Denise's face crumbled. She didn't deny it. She just looked down at her hands, and for the first time all night, I saw something that looked almost like shame settle over her. Dad tried once more, his voice losing its earlier authority. We built this family on people doing their part. That's not a crime. No, I said. But deciding in advance which daughter's part would cost her everything, and which daughter's part would cost her nothing, that's not family. That's a system, and I was never anything but the load-bearing wall in it. Nobody at that table spoke. I looked around at each of them, Mom, Dad, Melissa, Victor still searching for footing, Denise unable to meet my eyes, Elaine steady beside me, and understood that everything I'd gathered, every document, every witness, had already done its work. There was only one thing left to say. The words that had started this entire 6 weeks, the ones I'd carried in my chest since the night my mother first said them to me on the phone. I reached for the folder one last time and stood up straighter. I held up the last item in the folder, the single page I'd saved for exactly this moment. 6 weeks ago, I said, my voice quiet but steady. When I told you both I wasn't missing my wedding, do you remember what you said to me, Mom? Mom's eyes flickered with something like recognition and fear. I don't recall exactly. I do, I said. I wrote it down that same night, because I wrote it down that same night, because I couldn't believe you'd actually said it out loud. I looked at her directly. Melissa needs this family. You only need one day. The words landed in that room like something physical. I watched them hit, watched Mom's face go white, watched Dad's jaw tighten, watched Melissa flinch like she'd been slapped by a sentence she hadn't even said herself. That's not. I didn't mean it like that, Mom stammered. You meant exactly what you said. You just never expected to hear it back? Aunt Denise put a hand over her mouth, her eyes wet. Cheryl, she whispered, you told her that? About her own wedding? Mom didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence answered for her. Uncle Victor shook his head, still trying to hold his ground. There's context here we're not. What context, Victor? Elaine's voice was sharp now, cutting clean through the room. I was in that kitchen when Cheryl said something almost identical to me years ago about Tessa missing her own college graduation to cover for Melissa's babysitter falling through. She said family comes first, and Tessa understood that better than anyone. I've watched this happen for over a decade. It's not context. It's a pattern. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Dad, waiting for something, a rebuttal, an explanation, anything. Dad said nothing. And for the first time all night, Victor had nowhere left to stand. He sat back slowly, silent, the fight gone out of him. Denise was openly crying now, one hand pressed against her chest. I let this happen, she said, almost to herself. I knew, and I let it happen. Melissa stared at the table, refusing to look at anyone. I looked around at all of them, Daniel's steady hand finding mine under the table, Elaine's unwavering eyes, Denise's guilt finally breaking through decades of silence, Victor's certainty collapsing in real time, and my parents, cornered by their own words with nowhere left to hide. I'm not asking you to feel bad, I said quietly. I'm asking you to finally admit what this family actually is. Nobody at that table said a single word, and in that silence, for the first time in my life, I understood that the truth had already won. I left that dinner without waiting for an apology. I didn't need one anymore to know what was true. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Mom called twice. I let both go to voicemail, not out of spite, but because I finally understood that I didn't owe anyone an immediate response just because they were used to getting one. Dad texted once, "We need to talk about how to move forward as a family." I read it 3 times before I answered, and when I did, I kept it simple. I'm open to a relationship built on honesty. I'm not open to going back to how things were. He didn't respond after that, which, in its own way, told me everything. Melissa never reached out at all. I found out through Aunt Denise that she'd found another arrangement for the childcare crisis within a week, a co-worker, a rearranged schedule, something that had apparently been possible the entire time if anyone had ever actually looked for it instead of calling me first. Aunt Denise, though, surprised me. She called and for the first time in my life didn't defend anyone. "I should have said something years ago," she told me. "I'm sorry I didn't." I told her I appreciated that. I meant it. Uncle Victor stayed quiet for weeks. Eventually he sent a short message, admitting he'd never actually looked closely at how things were divided in our family until that night forced him to. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was honest, and honest was more than I'd gotten from my own parents. I didn't send any more money. I didn't rearrange any more plans. And when I think back now to standing with Daniel at our wedding, surrounded by the people who had actually shown up for us without needing to be convinced, I can finally feel what I couldn't let myself feel that day: lightness. Not because everything with my family was resolved. It wasn't, but because for the first time my worth in that family no longer depended on what I was willing to give up. If you were in Tessa's position, would you have forgiven your family or walked away? Tell us in the comments below. And if stories like this one, about family, boundaries, and earning your own peace, speak to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Justice had come. The truth was out, undeniable, sitting in the open where no one could rewrite it again. But there was still one more thing I needed to figure out, not for them, but for myself. The thing I needed to figure out had nothing to do with my parents, or Melissa, or anyone else who sat around that table the night everything came out. It was about me, because for 37 years I'd measured my worth by what I was willing to give up. Every canceled plan, every quiet sacrifice, every "of course, I'll handle it." I told myself that was love. That was what a good daughter, a good sister, a good person did. But sitting on my back porch a few weeks after that dinner, watching the sun go down with Daniel's hand resting easy in mine, I understood something I'd never let myself believe before. Love was never supposed to cost me everything. My wedding day hadn't looked the way I'd pictured it months earlier. Some of the flowers changed at the last minute. A few faces I once assumed would be there weren't. But standing at the altar, looking out at the people who did show up, not out of obligation, not because tradition demanded it, but because they actually wanted to be there, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel at any family gathering in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the fragile, performative kind I'd spent a lifetime maintaining to keep everyone else comfortable. The kind that comes from finally knowing exactly where you stand and being at ease there. My relationship with my parents didn't disappear entirely. It just changed shape. Smaller, more honest, built on actual respect instead of assumed obligation. Some days that felt like loss. Most days it felt like relief. Melissa and I still haven't found our way back to each other. Not really. Maybe someday we will. Maybe we won't. I've stopped needing to know the answer before I can move forward. What I do know is this. The version of me who used to disappear so everyone else could be comfortable, she's gone. Not because I stopped loving my family, but because I finally started loving myself enough to stop disappearing. These days, when Daniel asks how I'm doing, I don't have to perform an answer. I just tell him the truth. I'm exactly where I want to be. Finally, for the first time in my life, home, in a life that's actually mine.